Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Orthodox Logos. My name is Ian Silver, and today we are joined by Michael Witkoff. He is an author of the book on Masons and Their Lies. You can get that on Amazon, and I'm sure probably directly from him would be better, right?
You can get them on Amazon or signed directly from me.
Perfect, beautiful. And then he's also a Jewish convert and has become an Orthodox Christian. And today we're going to get into his background, his life and his journey through Freemasonry and how that led him to Orthodox Christianity. So thank you for being here.
Mm. You're welcome. I always call myself a Jewish convert, and recently on Gab, I'm getting attacked all the time for this. And I can't figure out what people are thinking exactly when they look at my profile. They see I say Jewish convert to Orthodoxy, and they immediately go, "Oh, he's a Jew. He's subverting. He's evil." Like they're not grasping that I'm the one that typed out my own profile. Like they're acting
They just
like
see
they've
the
come
word
across
Jew.
this. Yeah, but they're acting like they came across this big secret I was trying to hide, and they've figured out the truth. I'm trying to explain to them, like, when you edit a profile, I myself typed the word in. Like, you're not discovering some big thing, but they're not the cream of the crop.
You've already exposed yourself, so there's nothing.
I did.
There's
Yes,
nothing to expose.
Yes, exactly. I'm a Freemason Mossad agent working to undermine Christianity. Obviously.
Hey, it's okay. You're probably
That's
a
why I have all those Ferraris
too, right?
Oh, of course. Yeah, I mean, it comes with the territory.
That's how it works in the industry. Well, hey, thank you for being here, and I'm sure you've probably.
Thank you for inviting me.
Of course, I'm sure you've shared this story on multiple platforms on your own, and I know you did an interview with Allison, and I'm sure you went over some of this stuff. So, I apologize if it's going to be, regurgitating things you've already talked about, but I'm sure it's very interesting, and people love to know this stuff. So why don't you give us a little background about yourself, where you grew up,
Sure.
and just a little bit about your journey.
Sure. And it's no problem to tell the same stories. There's new people hearing it every time. And I forgot where it is, somewhere in the Bible, St. Paul says that it's not a trouble to him to write the same thing over and over again. So
Amen.
I understand what he's talking about. So my background, I grew up in Chicago in a Reformed Jewish household, not a devout one, but we did all this ceremonial stuff. You have the circumcision, you have the bar mitzvah, you go to temple for the high holidays, Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah, Sunday school, Hebrew school, all that stuff. But there was never like Bible reading at home. There was never talking about God. I was raised with, I would say, a pretty good moral compass in some directions. Like I was told, don't steal, don't lie, tell the truth, don't hurt people, that kind of thing. There was no idea of like sexual morality though. Certainly not any idea that morality derives from God. It's just, how I was raised by honest parents and grandparents, hardworking people.
Yep.
So I got some things in the right direction, some things not so much. And usually in Sunday school, I would run away from the services and go to the library in the synagogue and, read books about the Jewish resistance to the Nazis in the Warsaw Ghetto and things that were more interesting to me than sitting in the services, because I didn't believe in God. I didn't care. It didn't mean anything to me. And so I was just kind of a vague atheist going about my life until I got to college. And then I started doing drugs, and that led eventually to some sort of exploration of New Agey beliefs, even though, interestingly enough, it wasn't necessarily the drugs that made me New Agey. It was some of the ideas that I was exposed to in rehab 13 years ago, because I did so many drugs, I was getting myself in trouble and decided to go to rehab when I was 21. When I went to a place, I don't think it's the same name, but it used to be called Second Nature Entrada, based out of St. George, Utah. So it was a wilderness therapy program out in the tri-state area, the Great Basin Desert. I think it was 3 states that maybe it was 2 states, Nevada, Utah, going back and forth across the border of the desert. And some of the therapeutic initiatives there were drawn from Native American practices. And I'm not going to say that they didn't help. They helped me a lot, actually.
Yeah.
There's a lot of those wilderness programs, especially out in that area, have like the Anasazi way. And, there's something is derived from New Age or Indian Native American practices, I should say. And so that kind of got me going on that, but it wasn't like a serious study of mine until much later. I have a very long and complicated journey, but it wasn't really till I So after that, I went back to college in California, graduated, went to work in North Carolina for a while as a field instructor in a wilderness therapy program. Moved from
So
that.
then you started doing what you were part of.
Yeah, because it had helped me a lot. So I decided to, give back and help other people through it too.
Cool.
Except I worked with younger kids, like 13 to 17 years old, whereas
Wow.
my program, at least my branch of it, was voluntary. I was an adult. I signed myself up for it. After that, briefly worked in a psych ward in North Carolina, which is a horrible job. I don't recommend to anybody. Moved to Hawaii after that. And that was really where I think a lot of that spiritual stuff started, because the place I was at in Hawaii on the Big Island was very, very pagan. It was, I was still a liberal at this time. So it didn't bother me. There was a lot of gay people there. Like I was in the minority as a straight man in the big group of people, which, I was a sinner and a fornicator. I thought I was having a great time out there. There's only a few straight guys and all the women were, wanting intimacy.
You were
and
just as bad.
yeah, really, I was in retrospect. And it didn't bother me until a couple of the gay guys would start like hitting on me and saying inappropriate things. Then it started to bother me. But even then, it wasn't quite like it wasn't like an anti-gay thing or anything. It was just like, this is really inappropriate. You're making me uncomfortable. But I was exposed to a lot of New Agey ideas, and Pele, the volcano goddess, and what is that Indian elephant thing that they all like? Ganesh, is that what it's called? Or Ganesha?
Yes. Ganesh.
So I've been exposed to little ideas like this and UFOs and aliens, and then it wasn't until I got to San Diego from there that I really started getting deep into this stuff, like researching the Illuminati and the Freemasons and energy and Gnosticism and things of that nature, studying Zecharia Sitchin with his completely fabricated Sumerian translations, a Freemason, by the way, Jewish Freemason, Zecharia Sitchin, paving the way for the UFO narrative. And so I was reading about all this stuff, Illuminati, Masons, who runs the world, blah, blah, blah. And every day on the way to and from work, I worked at Greenpeace at the time in San Diego because I was still a hippie, pot smoker, thought I was doing good, raising money for animals. And some of the stuff they do is good, but overall it's kind of a communist organization now.
Yep.
But anyway, every day we would pass
it's a big front.
A big Freemason lodge. It really, they're funded by the Tides Foundation. So It's like all of these things that seem like grassroots resistance to the establishment. It's always funded by the establishment, right? It's a big game. It's like with Antifa, right? They're basically the paramilitary wing of the FBI, pretending to fight the man while being funded and organized by the man.
By the man, yeah.
Exactly. So I would always pass by this big lodge, big Scottish Rite building on the way to and from work along the 8 in San Diego, in Mission Valley.
I've seen that.
And one day,
it's the big one. If you're coming into San Diego on the left, like the massive one.
Well, you'll see it from either side, but
right off the highway.
Exactly. So one day after work, me and a coworker decided, like, hey, let's go check this out. Actually, no, I forgot a piece of the story. Let me go back a little bit. So I was canvassing one day, door to door. I started Greenpeace door to door. Eventually went to street sales, which means malls and whatnot. But I was canvassing door to door, which I was actually pretty good at, even though it's not fun. And a guy had a square and compass on his door jamb. And so I was pitching him for Greenpeace, and I said, what is this symbol? He said, oh, it's Freemasonry. I was like, oh, I've been reading about that. Like, what is that? And he just said, what was it that he said? I don't think he said it makes good men better. I think he said it's the world's oldest, largest fraternity. It's one of those like catchphrases that they teach you.
But that is another one of their sayings as well. It takes good men and makes them better.
Yeah,
which makes it sound great. It's like, oh, why wouldn't I want to do that?
Right. The devil appears as an angel of light, St. Paul warns us. Yep. So he gave me very like cryptic answers. It was obvious there was something he was not telling me, which made me more interested, of course. And then me and my coworker decided shortly afterwards to stop by this lodge, just go inside and see what was up, right? So we go in, we probably smell like pot, wearing our Greenpeace shirts. I have long hair, and all the guys there are dressed in suits. So, there's this funny kind of juxtaposition there. And an older guy starts talking to me, a guy that I ended up liking the guy a lot. He was a friend and mentor to me in the lodge. And he sat down with me and was telling me a little bit about it. He said, there are 3 degrees of masonry, and then the different appendant bodies have different degrees. And I said, but what about the 33rd? I heard about the 33rd degree. What's all that about? Of
course, that's the first question, huh?
Yeah, of course. And he says, well, the 3rd degree is higher than the 33rd degree. And so that it was like a puzzle. It was like this cryptic code for my brain I didn't understand, but it just increased this feeling of curiosity and intrigue and wanting to know more. And so there's all these symbols on the walls. What does this mean? What does this mean? And you only get pieces of answers. I mean, half the time they don't know what the symbols mean either.
They're
But,
still in the dark until they've reached a certain level.
well, and the different people have different opinions of what they mean too. Like Albert Pike might say one thing that's not agreed upon by another Masonic author, for example. But it was like the giant puzzle of knowledge. Like I could tell there was something there. There was a feeling that you get in a lodge, like there's something here worth exploring, I thought at the time. So I said, okay, well, how do I sign up? I said, well, how long have you been in the state? And I think I've been there for 9 months because I just got back from Hawaii semi-recently. And they said, well, you have to be in the state for a year to join, to be initiated, an entered apprentice Freemason, which is the first degree. But they kind of finagled the numbers a little bit and let me join, even though I hadn't been in the state for one continuous year. So I ended up joining, and I have nothing bad to say about the experience. Like, and I try to make this really clear in my book. Like, nothing bad happened to me while I was there. I've heard people lie, say you have to kill a family member to join or some nonsense like this. This is completely fake.
Or you're
maybe
drinking
for some
baby
dark
blood
or secret
out
group.
of skulls, and maybe that does happen, but
only on Tuesdays. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, maybe it's some secret group at a really high level. Maybe they do. Maybe it's even probable or likely that they do, but certainly not to just join basic level Freemasonry. And so I loved it. Like I never dressed up in a suit, had somewhere to go. It's almost like a replacement for church at that point. Not that I'd ever been to church, but it was like would I dress up nice and go on the weekend or during the week. I would start as a Tyler, which was the first officer, which is like you basically set up the lodge, stand outside the door during the degree, so you're not actually inside watching it. And I ended up being an officer in 4 different groups. I was, what was the word for it? Like, I'm forgetting the word, a prompter for a Scottish Rite degrees, meaning if the actors during the degree forget their lines, it was a very big room, I would tell them their lines. So I'm reading along with the degree, which was cool because most Masons don't actually know the degrees line by line. Like they're really long and complicated. When you join the Scottish Rite, you see 5 degrees in a row. Like you don't remember almost any of it. So for me, I was thrilled I could actually have the packets there. So there's the York Rite, there's the Scottish Rite. Those are the main 3. Yeah. Okay. And there's also a bunch of smaller other groups that are less well known, but those are the big ones. And I joined the York and Scottish Rite. I never joined the Shrine though.
Okay. And they're the ones who have the hospital, Shriners Children's Hospital, right? Yes. They do all these charitable good works.
They do.
You know, and
and that was part of the appeal.
That's not debatable. They do good things, but what it is it's the truth behind all of that, you know.
So it's tricky because a lot of Freemasons are just kind of naive, well-meaning Christian guys that don't see any problem between the two, which was why I wrote my book on the Masons and their lies, was to help people realize how incompatible they are. But a lot of the guys there were just normal, family guys with a job that enjoy dressing up and doing these secret rituals, and you get your handshakes and your passwords and all that.
And having a brotherhood.
They just don't know any better. Yeah, there are 33 degree Masons that would be the piano player for the Methodist church next door, for example. Stuff like that going on. Now there are some darker people there for sure, into some dark stuff. There's even entire groups that are considered schismatic Mason groups that you're not supposed to be part of. You're not supposed to go to their meetings. Almost the way, like if you're an Eastern Orthodox Christian, you're not supposed to go to like a Coptic Orthodox liturgy or Ethiopian a Jewish service. Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of this whole parallel hierarchy and religious structure. And they're very careful not to preach any monolithic view of theology or politics.
That's what I was going to ask. Who is their God? Because I know they refer to him as the Grand Architect, but you can be any. I think it's the Blue Lodge is where you can be any nationality.
Well, you can be any nationality, period. Even though that wasn't always the case. Like,
can you even be
blacks
a Satanist?
couldn't join Masonry for a long time. There are some there. So what they tell you is that you have to believe in a supreme being and an afterlife.
Yes, and the G stands for Grand Architect, not God, right?
It depends who you ask. So it could stand for Grand Architect. It could stand for generative power, an occult sort of concept. As long as you believe in a supreme being in an afterlife, or at least you say you do, there are atheists there that have just lied to get in. And then they send some interrogators or investigators to your house first to make sure you're not a complete criminal.
Talk to your wife.
Yeah, stuff like that. What do you do for a living? Blah, blah, blah. I mean, most of them are just nice guys. Like, I liked almost all the guys that I met. They were my friends. It was my social circle. So I always try to stress, like, I didn't leave because of some weird encounter that I had. I left specifically because I started studying the philosophy more deeply. So
You
their
found the
God
truth.
is, yeah, so who their God is depends on which one you ask.
Hmm.
Some of them will say the grand architect is the Christian God. Some will say it's the Muslim God. Like, it's designed so that whatever you are, you can kind of adapt its language to support your own belief system. But that in and of itself is a belief system of theological relativity. So they don't preach monolithic theology, and yet at the same time they do, that monolith being relativity, right? Being ecumenism, or perennialism really is the more accurate word. And ecumenism is kind of an offshoot of perennialism.
We're all taking the same path
being that
home.
there's, right, one light, many paths. You know, the idea being that there's one true religion, and all the outer expressions are just different versions for different people at different times. Like, they would say, some might say, for example, it was the same that gave Christianity to the Christians and Islam to the Muslims because that's better suited for that type of person than Christianity. Nonsense like that.
Yeah.
So that's perennialism, is that it's all pointing to the same place. But if you actually study any of these religions in any meaningful detail, they're wildly incompatible. It's very obvious they're not the same God, right? The Muslim description of the afterlife is like a 15-year-old boy's fantasy with all these virgins and wine and things like that. That's not the same as the Christian afterlife, which is a place of purity and experience and encounter with God for eternity. Very, very different.
And even coming down to, like, basic theology. Well, not basic theology, because the Trinity is not basic when you really get down to it, but stuff like that's completely different to the Mormons, to the Muslims, and
Yeah. I mean, even amongst groups that call themselves Christians, that word means 1,000 different things. When someone says, do you consider Protestants Christian? I say, well, it depends on the person, really. Like, I don't know what they believe just because they call themselves a Christian. That could mean you're a Unitarian, or it could mean you're a modalist, or you're a Gnostic might call themselves Christian. I don't know if you saw my debate with Marty Leeds. He thinks he's a Christian. So, that word doesn't mean anything in and of itself unless I know what it means to the person I'm speaking to.
On an individual basis.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
now, what I would
like,
say.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, in regards to who's a Christian, and I to be fair, I haven't read this in the Fathers or Saints. This is purely my own opinion. My own opinion is that the closer you get to the truth, the more grace you'll have. So, for example, if an atheist fornicator, which I was for so long, stumbles across the Bible because a Protestant gave him a Bible, reads the book of Proverbs, and starts changing his behavior to align with that, there is a lot of grace that comes with that because I'm getting closer to the truth, right? I'm not going to say God's not guiding me, because obviously if I'm reading this and changing my life, there's some amount of grace there. But that's not the same as being an Orthodox Christian, partaking of the mysteries and living a life of fasting and saintly intercessions and divine liturgy and akathis. It's a different thing, but I would say that God is drawing us all to the full truth, and people will embrace it to varying degrees. And if they stop at a certain level, then that's kind of as much grace as they're going to get. If they keep going, it's more and more, until obviously the complete fulfillment of that is full theosis. You become not canonized, doesn't make a difference for whether you're a saint or not, but you become a saint, and then you are just one with God, is the highest degree, right, of grace and of truth. I'm hoping I get there someday. I'm trying. But yeah, so that's kind of how I see if someone a Christian. I think it depends how serious they are about seeking the truth.
I think it also, like you said, it has to do with not just saying you believe it, but how you live your life based on that. You could say, oh, I believe this, but if you're not living your life based on that belief, then, do you truly believe that? Yeah.
And I mean, there are even pastors like Stephen Anderson who will call themselves a Christian, but then if you listen to their quote sermons, it's horrifying. Who tells his audience, as long as you're saved, you can go commit murder and adultery and you'll be fine because you can't lose your salvation. So that's not a Christian, even though most of what leaves his mouth is scripture verses or talking about Christianity.
It's an inversion, just like Kenneth Copeland, and you see people like that, the prosperity gospel. You give God,
inversion, but
you give God $1, and he'll give you 1,000. And that's it's a little tricky.
Yeah, if that were true, his audience would be richer than he is, and yet Copeland is significantly wealthier than these people.
They'd be taking their private planes to see him.
Mm-hmm.
So were you
exactly?
We can go back to what you were saying, but were you involved in any Gnosticism prior to being a Freemason? And I know that has quite a lot to do with the start of Freemasonry, right?
So I was really getting into the Sumerian stuff, particularly. Which is a kind of Gnosticism. There was a lot of, obviously I was high out of my mind at the time when I was doing this, because, after rehab, I was sober for a while, eventually relapsed back into it. reading these the Sitchin stuff and some other stuff, thinking that humanity was this group of slaves created by the Anunnaki to help them mine gold to send back to planet X or Nibiru and all that nonsense.
You would have
So
fit
that's
in
a
really
sort of
well in
Gnosticism.
Sedona.
Oh, I'm sure. I've heard nothing but similar about Sedona.
Yeah.
A lot of my Hawaii friends were really into Sedona.
It's like they're kind of going back and forth between Hawaii and Sedona. I noticed that a lot.
Well, there you go. There you go.
Yeah.
But I hadn't like studied Gnosticism specifically before I started getting into Masonry. And that was when I got exposed to more and I got really interested in Kabbalah and stuff like that. I mean, I was giving lectures on Kabbalah, on Baphomet, on Hermeticism to the Masons. I mean, there's different groups. Some groups are more casual. You just kind of show up, give each other some cool lectures, hang out. So that was what I started getting into. And I started doing sorcery on my own practice as well at home as like an individual practitioner. I never joined a group of magic people, so to speak, but I would learn from different groups or different individuals with sigil magic and, creating
Alchemy.
spirits and putting them in crystals. Yeah, that kind of thing. Which I was very convinced was like the truth of how to attain our lost power, that these evil religions try to keep us from knowing the truth of how powerful we are. But at the end of the day, all the occult teaches is just that you're God. It's really quite simple and stupid at the end of the day. But they use very complicated, glittery, sophisticated sounding language to arrive at this very basic, obvious lie. And then once I started becoming Christian, I was already a Mason when I started becoming Christian. So there was a long period of trying to like have one foot on both sides of the fence, so to speak, where I considered myself a Gnostic Christian for a while. I was really into the Cathars, for example, that kind of medieval group that was, they're kind of wiped out by the Catholics, but they were living very moral lives, or so they would say. They were horrified by all the wealth and power of the Catholic Church. So they kind of started in opposition to that, and they were dualists too, which I thought was accurate at the time. And I think there's a big connection between being unhappy and being a Gnostic, by which I mean the more miserable you are, the more willing you are to believe that some sort of evil demon created the world, right? Yeah. It just kind of goes with the territory.
And so like the Orthodox perspective from what I understand of Gnosis, is it's divine and human, it's coming together of two realities, heaven and earth. And the Gnostic view is it's like a separation of that in a sense. They believe the separation of Christ as divine and human, or sometimes you even see that he didn't even fully exist, that he was like a ghostly figure.
Right. Which is ironic because, the Bible specifically writes against that. That's why St. John, the apostle, was always talking about sensory experiences of Christ, whom we have seen with our own eyes, whom we have touched.
Yeah, he couldn't walk through walls.
He's writing, right. He's saying that because he's writing against the Gnostics or the Docetists, who were saying that Christ was some divine phantom or hologram without a physical body. So it's just like a reiteration of literally one of the oldest heresies that exists.
And would you agree that the basic principles of Freemasonry and would be like irreconcilable in the church? Like you can't be both. If you're going to be a Christian,
I would say you can't be both. Yeah. So there's a lot of overlap in the moral teaching.
Because you can't take communion if you're a Freemason in the Catholic Church, or I don't even think we allow Freemasons in the Orthodox Church. There's not a way to know all the time. Yeah.
I mean, they're not supposed to be, but there are a lot of Masons both in the Catholic Church and in the Orthodox Church. Some archdioceses have written against Masons and talked about why it's wrong, like Russia has. Antioch has not. I think Cyprus did. I don't know if GoArch ever has. But there are some overlaps. Like, so for example, the Christian concept of the old man and the new man, right?
Yeah, the old Adam, the new Adam.
Well, no, for us as individuals, I'm saying.
As individuals, okay.
There's somewhat of a superficial overlap between the Masonic idea, between that and the Masonic concept of the rough and perfect ashlar, meaning a rough stone that needs to have its rough edges kind of sanded off and hewn off until it's nice and smooth and can fit in well with the rest of the building or the temple of humanity. Like there's some moral overlap, right? Because Christians would also say we start off kind of rough, sinful, falling into temptation, and then Christ perfects us over time and we're healed of our wounds that lead to the bad behavior, and eventually we engage in theosis. But it's a very superficial difference, because for Masons it's like
your brotherhood does that for you.
Yeah, it's more like behavior modification than any sort of deep ontological
soul purification
change. Right.
Wow.
But overall, they're not compatible. And I think
Yeah.
anyone who's serious about studying both of them will quickly realize that. And that's the whole point of my book, is that I wanted to make this, I mean, it's a very short, I made it as easy to read as I possibly could, this complex topic, a short, relatively straightforward, easy read, so that by the time you're done with it, there's no question about whether these two are compatible. I mean, Masonry is its own separate religion. There's no question about it. And the more deeply you understand it, the more obvious that becomes.
Yeah. I have family. One of my favorite people in the world. He's a Freemason in England, and it's always been confusing to me because I know a lot of the things that we're speaking about, and I knew them. And he came over from England, and we went to the Grand Master's house here in Arizona. Crazy house, artifacts, stuff that belonged in a museum. It didn't make any sense to me. And he was very adamant about me becoming a Mason, and invited me and called me for weeks and weeks and weeks. And I would just always ignore his phone calls. And even, I'm not going to give his exact address, but it was something Devil's something. Like he lived on a street that was Devil's something. And I remember showing up, beautiful house, beautiful, young wife. I brought my kid with me because I was with my grandfather, and he was like, "Oh, we love little kids." And I just got like this, I just got this weird vibe. So I went almost as like a way to, for discernment, because I had already known, but I was curious. I was like, maybe this isn't what I'm thinking it is. And then as soon as I left, I was like, I think this is what I think it is,
Yeah.
And he even said, before I didn't even give him my address, and he's like, "We know where you live." I've moved since, but he's like, "Oh yeah, we know where you live. We know where you work." And I was like, okay. I was like,
well, they're not even supposed to be recruiting, but
yeah.
I'm glad that you realize there's something wrong.
I guess it has something to do with
if you're discerning, you
him
can feel that there's something off about it, like a feeling that something is not right here.
Yeah, so let's go back to, I know we kind of got off a little bit, but it was great. Let's go back to, so you became it's not an initiate. What's it called? What's the first?
I would say a candidate or initiate would also work.
And then the second degree is fellowcraft. Isn't that, am I right about that? So how long between being a first degree and a second degree? Can it happen in a matter of days, weeks, months?
I want to say there's at least a month between, because basically you have to pass what's called, I'm blanking on the word, it starts with a C. Basically, when you become a Mason, whatever degree you're at, they give you a little book that explains the whole ritual you just went through, but in coded language. It's in symbols. And you have to sit down with someone who explains to you what word each symbol represents. And then in order to go from one degree to the next, you have to be examined and repeat a big section of it that you've learned from the symbols and memorized. So they ask you like a bunch of questions. It's a test, right? A memorization test. And I saw people pass it that got a lot of it wrong, and they just didn't care and passed them anyway. Proficiency, it didn't start with C. It's called passing your proficiency. And so that can take, I mean, you could do it in a week, but I don't think they would want you to move you through that quickly. Some people do go through very quick. Joseph Smith, who founded the Mormon faith,
money as well.
I guess it's called it faith.
Money and land.
He was rushed through. Well, different people have different circumstances, but he was rushed through all 3 degrees very quickly, turns around, starts Mormonism. I think I went maybe 3 or 4 months between my original initiation and then being a Master Mason, at which point you can then join the appendant bodies, the York Rite, the Scottish Rite, Shriners, and other things of that nature.
Okay. Wow. And then, so you became a Master Mason. And then during this, you can also join other, I don't know what you would call them, groups within the Masonic Lodge. And what are some of those besides like the Scottish, the York, and the Shriner? Because I know Knights Templar is, and you have to be a Mason to be Knights Templar.
That's part of the York Rite.
Okay. And they, okay. Well, can you explain anything about that? That's kind of always been an interest to me, because, it's such an epic, it's got an epic historical background, and people think it's like this, like brutal, there's like a brutalness to it, but I'm sure it's changed over time.
So the York Rite is composed of 3 smaller bodies called, man, I forgot what the first one was called. It's been a long time since I've thought about this stuff. The second one was the Cryptic Council or something with the word cryptic in it, or the Cryptic Council of Royal and Select Masters. I think that's what the second one is called. And then the third one is the Commandary of the Knights Templar. So in the Knights Templar, it's a very expensive group. If you buy all the costumes, like there's a sword, like a dress sword and a big hat with a feather in it and all kinds of silly LARPy stuff.
Did you do all of that?
No, I didn't pay all that. I never became an officer in that group.
Okay.
It's the only degree where they mention Christ or the name Jesus. I think it's the only time they actually use his name that I remember in any Masonic degree.
Are they referring to a different Jesus though?
Well, they would tell you no, and I'm sure some of the individuals are and some of them are not. And so that group I thought was going to be really cool because, like you were saying, there's like this history of the Knights Templar,
Yeah,
and then it was epic. Literally the most boring group in all of Masonry. Like they just have an expensive dinner once a month or once every other month. But you got to understand the way Masonry works is there are people there looking to recruit others into smaller, quieter, less public groups. So they have spies, for lack of a better word, like the public front of what did the Knights Templar do? Like I was never pulled into anything deep from that group. So I don't know what that leads to that you're screened through. There were other groups that I was pulled into. That was not one of them. So maybe there isn't one there, maybe there is. But I definitely got the vibe there's people that overlap with like government stuff and intelligence community stuff. I have no evidence of that, but sometimes you just get a vibe from people. Not that that's again evidence of anything.
Well, we know that
I
like most of the presidents have been Masons. You know, a lot of the people that run the media.
Or Skull and Bones,
yeah, Skull and Bones, exactly. And you have to be a Mason to be Skull and Bones, obviously, as well. So what about, you spoke about like Baphomet, and I know they have a lot of, there's Baphomet and Moloch are very prevalent in Masonic.
I never heard anything about Moloch.
You did?
I never heard anything about it.
Okay, cool.
Because they're trying very hard not to offend you. So Baphomet, again, is not mentioned in any Masonic degree that I ever saw. I gave a lecture on Baphomet, just breaking down the symbolism of the sun and moon and the male and female body, and the one hand pointed up and the other hand pointed down, and Salve et Coagula tattooed on the arms. It's just an alchemical symbol. I don't think Baphomet was like worshipped as a deity like some people think. It's really just symbolic communication of a bunch of different alchemical and occult concepts like as above, so below, union of opposites, all that. So I mean, I gave a lecture on that. When I was still a Mason, I wrote a book that was pro-Masonry, actually, that was showing the combination, I can't get my words right, showing the commonalities between astrology and alchemy and Kabbalah. You can't buy the book anymore. I unpublished it. I think I burned the last copy, actually, so there might be no more copies in existence besides people who bought it. Yeah. But I never saw, like, Baphomet was never mentioned in a degree. Moloch was never mentioned in a degree. And I saw 31 of the Scottish Rite degrees. You become a 32nd degree on your first day, so it's kind of meaningless.
Yeah, that's what I heard. Most people wouldn't know that. They think it's like, after 10 years.
No, in some countries it is. In some countries you have to wait, I want to say 6 months between Scottish Rite degrees. But in America, at least in the southern jurisdiction for Masonry, I went to Oklahoma. I forgot the name of the town, some little tiny town in Oklahoma with a gigantic Scottish Rite lodge that probably had 95% of that town's wealth inside with paintings and statues and stuff.
Wow.
And I saw
like collecting
they do all
32
like degrees. Oh, Guthrie, that was the name of the town, Guthrie, Oklahoma. They did all 32 degrees in a row there. I was just so tired I was asleep through one of them in the car. I don't remember which one, maybe the 16th or the 9th or something. So what I saw, I never saw any mention of Baphomet or Moloch.
Okay, but I mean, I've seen things where it is mentioned, but like you said, there's different sects. Like you could maybe that was in something else that you didn't get involved.
So there's other groups. There's a bunch of groups that call themselves Masons that are more, in the Masonic term, operative rather than speculative, meaning there's a group called the Rite of Memphis Misraim that is what Aleister Crowley came out of, that actively teaches the practice of sorcery, which mainstream Freemasonry does not. So maybe they do stuff like that there. I wouldn't be surprised. You're not supposed to go to that if you're a regular Mason, but I think a lot of people probably do anyway. But I'm just talking about the mainstream Masonry that I was a part of.
Okay, what about did you see anything like, I've heard about Amorc? Do you know what Amorc is?
Yeah, I was part of Amorc.
What is that exactly? What does that have to do with? It's like it's Rosicrucian, isn't it?
It is. It's the ancient mystical order of the Rose Cross. It's basically an online Rosicrucian ministry where anyone who pays the fee can sign up, and then you get these um, pamphlets, for lack of a better phrase, digital pamphlets sent to you, I want to say once a month, with like a teaching on how the world works or how the human brain works, and a meditation to do and a ritual to do. In fact, when I was pulled into the Masonic Rosicrucians, I had to leave AMORC because they said you can't be part of any other group that uses the word Rosicrucian if you want to join us. And I really wanted to join. That was like, I was thrilled to be invited into this group that is not a public group. It doesn't have a popular household name.
And that's very Gnostic.
Extremely. That's where you will hear Kabbalah and alchemy, like talked about, sorcery, talked about much more openly.
Do they teach it in that class? In not that class, but do they teach you stuff there specifically?
So they do publish material for other members of that group that goes pretty in depth on that kind of stuff. Yeah.
Wow. And but did you learn it there? Or did you learn it on your own? Because you said that you
No, I learned it on my own.
On your own. I know David Patrick Harry.
And I wasn't in that group for very long.
And David Patrick Harry talks about it in one of his videos, how he, did the whole thing, putting the money on the ceiling or whatever, turning $1 into $1,000, and doing things to make that happen. Other things we won't mention.
Sure. I was only in that group for a short while because by that point I had already started going to a Protestant church, and that was kind of my last hope for Masonry. Was like, okay, because they told me to join, I had to be a Trinitarian Christian to join that group.
Weird.
Or maybe it was maybe it was the Knights Templar. No, it was the Knights Templar. They said I had to be a Trinitarian Christian, and I lied and said that I was. But for this group, you had to be a Christian, and at that point, I'd already started going to church. So I was like, okay, now I'm telling the truth about this now, because they said when I joined the Knights Templar, like, if you're not Trinitarian Christian, I think this was a long time ago, and I was smoking weed at the time, so forgive my bad memory on this. I think it was either you have to be a Trinitarian Christian or at least agree to protect and defend Trinitarian Christian. So even though I said, well, I'm Jewish, they still let me in.
You're like,
this group, you had to actually
profess
Christianity. Right. This group, you had to actually profess Christianity to be a Masonic Rosicrucian. And so I was really hopeful. It's like, oh, good, there are Christians in Masonry. And then you get there and it's just all sorcery, all occultism. And so that was kind of very disheartening. And that was one of the last groups that I was interested in, that when I saw the truth of it, helped my decision to leave Masonry, because I was like, okay, this is not what I was looking for. I'm trying to become a Christian. This isn't what I thought it was. It was an interesting group. Like, it was kind of an honor to be invited into it. Lots of very smart people there, but smart with worldly wisdom, not with spiritual wisdom, sadly. But yeah, you got to leave AMORC to join that. So they told me.
And then that was your first time, stepping into a church in years?
Ever. When I started going to church. Yeah.
Yeah, because you came from a Jewish background, so you went to synagogue as growing up, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So what was your experience, transitioning from being a Freemason to a Protestant? They're both, can be deceptive in their own way.
Well, I basically, a friend of mine that had been praying for me for years, once I told her I was interested in going to church with her, she brought me to a Wesleyan church in San Diego. And
which is non-denominational, or is that a denomination?
I think they would consider themselves Wesleyan denominationally.
Okay.
I mean, they don't get into deep theology or anything, but
yeah, no, they don't go into
theology-wise. It was very similar. No, but it was similar to Orthodoxy in terms of the basic theology. So it wasn't a huge leap, even though I wasn't a Trinitarian at the time when I started going, and that would take me a while, actually. The sermon that was given by the pastor, it was like God was talking to me through him. And by that I mean the idea of sin and its consequences had never been explained to me in a way that actually struck me and made me realize the connection between my own behavior and the outcomes that I was getting. And then it was so powerful that I just never stopped going until I became Orthodox, which was a couple years later. And for a while, I would go to church after a Masonic meeting. So I would show up with my Masonic jewelry on, my lapel pin, my ring.
And they didn't say anything.
A couple times. Well, a couple people did. A couple people told me that stuff is of the devil, that stuff's evil. And I said, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, that's just propaganda. In retrospect, they were right, of course. But yeah, I would go with my bling, wearing my suit, looking all fancy and whatnot. And I started reading the scriptures, obviously, by that point, and just trying to learn more about it, and slowly joining the social circle of that church. I put myself on the welcoming committee no one asked me to be. I would just stand at the door and greet people because I wanted to meet people and help. I wanted to volunteer. That's how I met Senator Michelle Bachmann. Was she a senator or a congressperson? One of those things. She had a connection to that church, actually, so I met her there. We actually had a great conversation about Alice Bailey and externalization of the hierarchy and the occult foundations of the United Nations. Yeah, she knows more than you might think about that stuff, because she was on her way to go start a ministry in the UN, and I wanted to make sure that she understood what she was getting into, and she definitely did. And I had a great time at that church. I really love the people. I'd never been around Christians before at all. I guess I'd been around one Christian when I worked at Greenpeace, a friend who has sadly since fallen away from the faith after his marriage didn't work out the way he was hoping. But yeah, they were all so friendly and welcoming, but I was very like only a toe in the water at the time. I was like, how can you work at a church and just talk about Jesus all day? Like, okay, I have my Jesus time, like half an hour on Sunday, and then I have a life to live, like
And then
these were separate boxes.
Your Mason time.
Right. So it was all very compartmentalized. Whereas now, for the Orthodox, our life is supposed to be just one big holistic worship service to God, and internally, ideally. We're not supposed to have our Jesus time here and then our life here,
Your whole life is orthodoxy.
Yeah. I mean, we're all working on that one day at a time, ideally. I know I certainly have a very long way to go, and every day I learn more ways I'm failing to live up to my professed ideal. Because I think if God showed you how evil you were all at once, you would just cease to exist. You would just die of depression immediately. Yeah. So he only shows you a little bit at a time so you can like work on it and heal it and whatnot. Which is
sometimes even then it's more than we can handle, in moments. But
yeah, sometimes it is. I mean, my priest just gave a great talk last night about these moments where God shows you just how evil you truly are. And I was like, yeah, I'm familiar with that process. And the funny thing is, every time you get over one of those, you're like, okay, I've solved my problems. I'm a good Christian now. And God's like, oh, really? Let me show you another layer of the selfishness and the pride and the wickedness and the greed in your heart. And it's just a lifelong process, And that is a level of depth that I never approached in the Protestant thing. So, I mean, I got baptized in that Protestant church, Trinitarian baptism, great time there. I mean, I am in great debt to those Protestants. They taught me how to love God, taught me how to read the scriptures, maybe not with the correct patristic exegesis, but I mean, I couldn't have told you the apostles' names when I started going there. I didn't know anything about this stuff. And they were so pious and zealous. Like I learned a great deal from them. They really inspired a love of Christ in me that has stuck with me, even though I'm no longer going there. And, I tried to go back to, so that pastor that really converted me, he ended up leaving that church to go start a new one, which has since blown up. And I wanted to go support him, even though I was now Orthodox. This was
like a mega church
a year ago. Not a mega church, just a local one. But he gets a lot of new people coming, and they get a lot of money. I went there to go support him at the grand opening, and I think I made it 10 minutes through the worship music, and I just left and went to my Orthodox church. I was like, I cannot do this. I was trying to do a good thing, but it's so saccharine, their worship music. It's so sweet and kind of, it just left a bad taste in my mouth. Like once you have the reverence of the divine liturgy, you can't go back to the rock and smoke show. And,
I always say it's very like live, laugh, love Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
It's like
that's right. And I still love that guy, but couldn't do it.
I went to one of my Orthodox brothers. It's actually my fiance's godfather. He did a little, I guess you could call it a sermon on campus for Christians on campus, and he talked about, I think you have a video kind of titled this. His wasn't titled this exactly, but if God good, why evil exist? Like you have like a funny,
if God good, why bad thing happen?
Bad thing happened? Yeah. So he did this whole hour-long thing, and it was beautiful. He did it from an Orthodox perspective, and you could kind of see like their minds were like blown. And at the end, he goes, "Do you mind if I pray?" And in the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. And he does the Lord have mercy, and it was just different. It was different because when we first got there, he said, "Oh, I start at 7:00. We get there at 7. It's like 45 minutes of worship music." And me and my fiance and my godmother are in the front row because we wanted to be up close, but we're the only ones sitting. Everybody else got hands up, and I was like,
"How long have you been engaged for?"
3 years.
You got a wedding date?
February 18th.
Congratulations!
Thank you. Congratulations to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. I'm in month 2 right now of marriage. Is your child with this fiance or with somebody else?
Previous.
Gotcha,
Yeah.
gotcha. Does she have any kids too?
No, not yet. That's something we'll be working on after marriage.
Yeah, I'm working on it too. I'm working on it too. Yeah,
So,
it's
but yeah,
you
we
don't
found
live
the
with her, do
faith
you?
together.
The
I
fiance?
do. I do.
You do live with her. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, you'll have a
That's,
little bit less of a shock to your lifestyle than I have.
yeah. So you
You're already
didn't.
used to living with someone. No, I've never even lived with a girlfriend before.
Wow.
Yeah, so this was a lot. So we got married
Who's
and
the
then
messy
moved. Me, by far. So we got married and moved states 5 days later. So we kind of lived like a year. It feels like about 2 years in the first month. So we had a lot of, and then our priest was sick with COVID in another state, quarantined when we got to our new place. So we didn't have a priest for the first 2 weeks in the middle of being a newlywed couple in a new state. So we had a lot of, a lot of stuff to endure and figure
I
out.
don't know why I'm glitching out like that. Do you see that?
I do see it. Yeah.
I wonder what that is. We'll see if it stops. Did it
Yeah,
stop? Okay.
strange.
There we go.
Yeah, marriage is very edifying, and it's like
It's
a
a form of
mirror. You're
martyrdom.
mirrors.
I've heard that as well.
Totally.
You know,
Totally. You become mirrors for the other person, and sins will be revealed in your heart through marriage that you would have never seen otherwise. So it's really like salvation on fast forward.
is she Orthodox as well?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So you had
We
a
got married like a month and a half ago.
cool. So you had an Orthodox wedding or a sacramental
Mhm.
wedding. How was
Yep.
that
Yeah,
experience?
it's awesome. The crowning. I mean, honestly, my wedding was like a perfect day, start to finish. And I have friends that had a horrible wedding day. Our engagement day was perfect. Our wedding day was perfect. The crowning ceremony was awesome. Sadly, our priest got injured, so it was his assistant priest that did our wedding. But a sacrament's a sacrament.
Yep.
Doesn't matter who's doing it as long as they're a valid priest.
Yep.
And then we had our decrowning ceremony a couple weeks ago, which you're supposed to do 8 days after the crowning ceremony.
Is there a reason for the 8? Is this symbolic to something?
I'm still not sure what the symbolism of the decrowning or the uncrowning is.
Because I know there's a lot of, like the 40 days, the baby gets baptized 40 days, or
Yeah.
the entry into the church 40 days. And
Yeah,
I think
I'm not sure
that has to
exactly
do
what it's
with
about.
that has to do with Christ walking through the desert for 40 days, I believe.
Like
Right.
his in the wilderness.
Yeah, I think that's.
Well,
I think
40
that's
is a very common number. You had 40 days of rain in the days of Noah, 40 years
40
of
days of
wandering
Lent.
with Moses and the Israelites. Yeah, 40 days of Lent. 40 is a common number. I'm not sure what the decrowning is
The 8
about,
means.
but it's another ceremony. So yeah, it went great, and then it's been a lot of adjustment. I've lived alone or not alone, but without, like I said, in my house ever. So getting used to someone else and sharing space and stuff. I'm definitely the messy one because when I'm a guy. When I was a bachelor, like I throw clothes on the floor and just who cares? That's where they'll be the next day.
Me too.
Yeah, that doesn't
There's
fly
probably
anymore.
probably some over there.
There might be, but yeah, it's cool. It's cool.
So
And
how was
you
your
become
move?
one flesh. It went
That's
really
a lot
smooth.
all at once.
Yeah.
Getting married, moving. They say those are some
Yeah.
of the most stressful things that you can do.
Yeah,
You did them all at once. That's crazy.
I did. The actual move went really smoothly. We're still working on finding a permanent place to live. We got some things in the works though. Please keep us in your prayers if that works out.
Always.
We've just been Airbnb hopping, which is not fun. I mean, I've had more stress moving from one Airbnb to another than I did moving from one state to another. You got to pack up all your stuff again and do all this. And then we spent 5 hours moving, and then I went to work right after. It's just like, we haven't really I think we've had one day to just chill since we got married, or since the honeymoon, I should say.
I bet you can't wait to have
anything.
Your icon wall set up and.
Oh yeah. I mean, most of our icons are in storage, but we have a couple great ones. A couple of Saints Peter and Favronia that actually Jay Dyer and his wife got us one of those icons. I didn't know who they were. It's this beautiful diptych. We looked at the story, loved it. This married couple that ended up becoming monastics in their elder years, which is an idea that my wife played around
living
with.
Separated.
Yeah, but after they've already had kids and grandkids, have done all their worldly business, going off to be a monk and a nun, but near each other though. And the cool thing about their story is
they could still see each other.
Can't be buried in the same coffin. Yeah, they can still see each other. Monks can't be buried in the same coffin together. So St. Peter and Favronia buried separately, but then when they looked at the relics to see if they were incorrupt, they were in the same tomb. So they separated the bodies, and then they looked later and they're in the same tomb again. So they were
Wow.
rejoining each other after death. Yeah, which is beautiful, you know. So that's kind of an idea that we've had. We got a long way to go, certainly, before we would be ready for that. But I think it would be cool, you know, get the full Orthodox experience. You got the marriage and the kids, and then also the monasticism. Like, life
Wow.
is so short, right? We never even know if we got another day of life. Doesn't matter how old we are. So this is just kind of a long-term spiritual fantasy, I suppose. Fantasy in a
That's
good
awesome,
way.
though.
But yeah, so we do have some icons, but we're looking forward to having a real icon wall. Absolutely.
Well, we'll be praying for you and hoping that, you know, you end up where God wants you to be. But
Thank you.
let's see. I wanted to see if we could maybe touch on some other things as far as
Sure.
your faith. Do
Yeah.
you have, was there anything that really solidified the faith for you? I know you said that you had that experience with the Protestant pastor who was really speaking to you. You know, you felt as if God was speaking to you. What about anything
Yeah.
that really solidified your faith? What was it like your first time, you know, entering an Orthodox church? Do you remember that? Was it, what jurisdiction was it?
That was Greek the first time I
Greek?
walked in.
Cool.
Um,
So where were you baptized?
I in Gorge.
Cool.
I'm not
Same.
there anymore, but I was baptized Gorge.
Yeah.
I remember I felt like I'd stepped into the ancient world. There was something really beautiful about it, and I was also really scandalized by the icons because, you know, Second Commandment violation, Protestant stuff, right? And I didn't, and it's not like you can understand Orthodoxy from outside. I mean, maybe
No,
arguably not even from inside, but
no,
certainly
not
not from
for a long
outside.
time.
No. So, you know, you see people bowing down in front of an icon and kissing it. It looks like idolatry if you're coming from a Protestant background. And I was so horrified by that. And I didn't understand why there was like no emphasis on sermons at all. Like, I think my first service was a Vespers. I was like, where's the sermon? You know, I didn't get it. But there was something about it that really kind of, I felt like I got bit by the Orthodox bug. Like, okay, I have to study more. And even part of it was like, okay, I have to prove that what they're doing is idolatry. And I would study and study. I was like, oh, it's not idolatry. So kind of like I was trying to disprove that, I convinced myself of it. And then what really solidified it for me, at least for the Orthodox thing, was I'd seen Father Josiah Trenum's videos and loved them.
Yeah.
And in San Diego, I was only an hour and a half from his church. So I emailed him, like to meet you. He said, great, come on up. So I went to a service up there in Riverside, and I got to meet him. I got to be alone with him in his office for about 15 or 20 minutes.
Where he films all his videos?
I think so. I mean, he's got a pretty big operation there, and it's actually growing again. They're building a whole second floor in that.
He's got
auditorium now.
100 catechumens right now.
And that does not surprise me at all. It is a large operation. The rest of Riverside is rough. The devil has the rest of Riverside, but he's got that little beacon of light at least. And just talking about everything, like my journey through Masonry and some of my questions about Orthodoxy. And I said, you know, I was like, how can I help the kingdom of God the best? Like, how do you think I should get this Mason book out there? Like, how do you think I can have the biggest impact and help the most people? And he said, well, first, I don't think you should publish it unless and until you become baptized Orthodox Christian. And so my first act of Orthodox obedience was not publishing that book as an inquirer or a catechumen.
That's a hard one.
I think I came home from my baptism and published it. I was so excited. But after that meeting with Father Josiah, I drove back down to that Greek church and I said, okay, I want to be a catechumen. You know, Father had convinced me, not just with the words he was saying. It wasn't even what he was saying to me. It was just who he is as a person.
Yeah.
It was his presence, his love, his joy, his zeal. I mean, I don't know if you've ever met him, but you feel like you're around an apostle. There's something different in the air around that guy. Like, he's just glowing,
something angelic.
Guy. Definitely. You know, the man has 10 kids. I mean, you learn a lot.
You gotta be a saint patience. If you have that many kids.
Seriously. It's just somehow who he was. And I distinctly remember thinking on the drive home, if this is the kind of man that Orthodoxy turns you into, then I want to be Orthodox because I want to be a man like that. So he was just a great role model and continues to be a great role model. You know, I've had the pleasure of seeing him in person on a few occasions since then. He actually met my wife back when we were just engaged.
That's awesome.
We went to the Mother of God conference at his parish where Bishop Irene came to give a talk. Father Maximus Constus recorded a lecture and sent it in. Lots of people were there. And so that was what really solidified it for me, was meeting Father Josiah. As far as what solidified me on the conversion to Christianity in the beginning, it was just the feeling of grace and the clicking together of the pieces that I was learning from those sermons from that Protestant. And then I felt like I'd gone as far as I could there, really. And the more I studied the Bible, I started seeing things that the church was doing that weren't against what the Bible was saying. And I got very unsatisfactory answers about why that was happening. That's when I started to look for something more traditional. No, I would say, well, they had female pastors there, for example.
Well, that Bible doesn't say that.
I said to the head pastor there, a well-known conservative Republican guy, rubs shoulders with Trump, all this stuff. I said, well, if you're a Bible-believing church, how can you have female pastors when the Bible says not to? And I wasn't trying to start a fight with him. I was just curious. And he said, because it's my church and we do things my way here. And I thought, that's a horrible answer. I'm going to look for something else. Now, that wasn't my pastor that said that. That was the head pastor. So his terrible answer to that question was what spurred me to look at other things. And I was talking to this guy on Facebook at the time, back years ago when I had Facebook, a guy who's now very famous on Gab named Neon Revolt. He was one of the main Q promoters, who was baptized Orthodox. He was a friend of mine for years. He's since blocked me because I don't believe in Q and UFOs. But he was actually the first person to mention Orthodoxy to me. We were just talking in private chat. He said, oh, you should look into Orthodoxy if you want something more traditional. And I said, what is that? Never heard of it. So I Googled it, and there was a church 4.5 minute drive from my house. That was the Greek church. Yeah. And I mean, he's kind of fallen away. I see him reading a lot of Protestant stuff. He's fully into this UFO aliens nonsense. I don't know how. I think the Q stuff really screwed with his soul because he was so deeply invested in it. And then to have it revealed that it was all just a big psyop. I don't think he's moved through the phases of grief yet, of accepting that. I think he's still stuck on it.
I'm guilty. I was a big follower of that, big Trumper, big.
I was too.
QAnon, and I had the "Where We Go One, We Go All" hat, and but it's weird. As much as that stuff I've realized is a psyop, there's a good amount of truth in it, but it distracts you from the truth of Christ. Because their savior is Q, their savior is Trump, and it's like, besides all the politics, nobody's going to save you but Christ.
Yeah, it gives you a little bit of truth and then pulls you into the dark side, which is what the devil very often does.
Exactly.
Right? All the Gnostics use the name of Christ, right? But
they
use something nice to pull you away from the truth.
Same with the New Age Christ consciousness.
Totally. Yeah. So I pray for him.
I believe in Christ. We're like, well, which Christ do you believe? The Mormons, we believe in Christ. And you mean the Christ whose brother was Lucifer and Heavenly Father came down and made love to Heavenly Mother? That's not the Jesus we believe in.
No. Did you see the interview I just did with Jeremy Firth, the ex-Mormon?
Yes, I did.
Yeah, I learned a lot about Mormonism from that interview.
Do you know who Jeff Durbin is?
Yeah, I tried to debate him once and he never got back to me.
So, I mean, we don't have to go into it, but he has some good stuff, against Mormons. But then even his stuff that he's debating, I'm still like, well,
I like that he has
you need a third person in there.
Athanasius, but he won't be Orthodox.
Yeah.
You know that, right? He's got a tattoo of Athanasius on his shoulder.
Yeah. And it's funny. It's like you need him, a Mormon, and an Orthodox priest all in the room. So he can debate the Mormon, and then the Orthodox priest can set him straight at the same time.
I tried. I mean, I briefly lived with a woman in my last apartment just because it was the landlord's daughter. She was just there because she had nowhere else to be. And her friend was a fan of Jeff Durbin. She was one that recommended. Yeah, she recommended I reach out and see if I can debate him, because I was talking to her about Orthodoxy. And they never got back. I tried, never happened. But I mean, I respect Jeff's character, like the way he composes himself and debates with people, I think is very respectable. So I had hoped for it, but maybe since I have this tiny little online ministry, I'm not a big famous person like him. Maybe he just didn't care, or maybe just never saw an email. Who knows?
I've always thought that you or Jay Dyer would be that'd be quite interesting.
It would be.
And I have a friend who is he's a catechumen now. He just got his baptismal date. He left the Mormon church. His family's Mormon. His family's Mormon. I think his grandfather or uncle was part of the Guild of 70, and really, really into it. And that's I was going to tell him to watch your video, because that's a great interview where he could maybe learn ways to tell his family, and who knows how people are going to react to that, because we always joke, and I'm sure he'll see this, but we always mess with him like, oh, well, you don't get your own planet now, so sorry.
That's right. Maybe if I make a video calling out Jeff Durbin respectfully and nicely. Maybe that would get his attention.
Uh-oh,
I've never
epic.
heard him talk about orthodoxy, so I don't know what
No,
what
he
his
has a lot of views that are almost like they're like so close to being Orthodox. And then he just goes back to,
bummer.
sola scriptura
There are some Protestants that have a great spirit that I think would make excellent
Totally.
Orthodox Christians. I don't know if you know, I think the guy's name is David Lynn.
and the opposite
You know the
too,
David
right?
Lynn? You know that guy David Lynn? I think is his name. He's a black guy, a street preacher that just goes around like
Yes.
preaching against transgenders and gays, but he's very like loving to them as he does it.
Yeah.
He really has a good.
Well,
he composes himself very well.
He admits that he's also the worst sinner. Like.
Yeah. That guy would make an awesome Orthodox evangelist.
Yeah.
So hopefully he'll become Orthodox someday.
I like the Orthodox way of evangelizing, I guess you could call it. We're a little bit quieter, and we more so wait for people, it seems, to come to us. I've always been told, we're supposed to talk about it. Obviously, we're supposed to minister, but a lot of the times you gotta wait for the right moment when someone brings it up to you. So what's this Orthodox thing? And we've had plenty of friends, glory to God, that have, a friend of ours reached out yesterday, and she posted a quote by Saint Paisios, and she's very, very New Age, and all that beautiful person. And so my fiance said, "Are you thinking about becoming Orthodox?" And she said, "I'd be willing to attend a service." So we told her to go to a liturgy, and we'll see.
Nice.
We'll see how that goes. Because
I've always wanted to like get a table at a mall and like just have some icons set up and talk to people. Well, because here's my logic. Planned Parenthood tables at malls, right? People walk by and they're hit with that propaganda. Why are we not there countering with our truth?
Like right
why are
next
we
to
allowing
them?
these people? Yeah, why are we allowing them to take up space and territory where they can't hear the opposing side? I've always felt that we should be doing something like that. And you can table at a mall for free most of the time. They don't charge you. You just got to make sure no one else is using the space that day.
Yeah. So you could do that.
Maybe that's just my. I was a street canvasser for years. Talking to strangers on the street was something I usually enjoyed and was relatively pretty good at even. I'm sure I'd get attacked and yelled at and stuff, but
you could just have an icon of Theotokos, an icon of Christ.
Yeah, just chill and have some pamphlets out. Yeah, most Orthodox churches in the narthex, they have all those little pamphlets explaining different things of the faith.
Perfect.
Just have that out. Say, hey, come and see. Yeah, I think that would be awesome.
Colleges do that. Colleges do like the Orthodox Fellowship Committee, where they walk around campus. We have one here. I didn't know you had to actually be in college to do it, because I was really interested in doing something like that and filming it. I thought it would be, interesting. Yeah. Obviously with a blessing. I'm not sure how my spiritual father would feel about that.
I'm not sure how mine would either. My priest is awesome, super traditional, super Orthodox, doesn't want any sort of public attention, at least on himself. Cool. So he's always he errs on the side of caution, I think, with that sort of thing. Yeah. But he knows I have my ministry and whatnot, so to each his own.
So I think that we kind of going back to how our friend got interested in it. I think what really sparked it for me was the rich tradition, and a lot of the things that I was looking for in other religions and other denominations. And I've said this before. I felt like it was just every little piece of everything encompassed into one thing. So I think that's what helps people transitioning to being Orthodox. Although it, like you said, seeing people bowing, kissing the icons can be a little off-putting, but I think after just a few times you start to understand, the meaning. And I had a conversation with a girl yesterday who was trying to talk to me about praying to the saints, and she could not grasp the idea of how when we die, we're not separated from God when we die.
Exactly. Yeah.
And she kept asking for, scriptural evidence. And I sent her verses and stuff like that. She said, well, it doesn't say to pray to the saints, and she kept going back to this whole thing where she couldn't grasp the idea. I said, well, do you ask people at your church or your friends to pray for you?
Right. Yeah.
And, I said, do you kiss a picture, of your grandmother?
Yeah.
It's,
a lot of Protestants I've talked to, when you talk about praying to the saints, they often default to, but the saints are dead. So what they're saying is they don't actually believe in the gospel, right?
Yeah, exactly. They
Which
believe
really
in living to living.
When you hear them say it. Yeah. Right? When you hear them say they think dying in Christ means that you're just dead, it's like, well, then why do you go to church at all if you don't believe in the
why
core
do you pray
of this?
Why do you pray to God if he's not physically on earth?
Yeah, right.
You know?
I mean, and to be fair to them, it's not like they've ever thought this through carefully. Like when they see us praying to saints, asking for intercession, they're just reacting to it from their own
Yeah.
programming. Like I don't think they've gone through line by line and really tried to examine this and figure it out. But then the ones that do, oh, God willing, they'll become Orthodox and realize that we're right. And the more you live it, the more sense it makes too. Like it's an experience in your nous, in your inner heart, more than something that your logic can figure out by itself rationally.
Yeah, it's
like
something our what is it? Our finite mind can't even understand, that these icons are a window to heaven. They're not just a moment in time, they're eternal. It's something
right.
that
And the more you experience it, the more sense it makes. And then you want to do it. Like I feel naked praying without icons now, whereas before it horrified me when I was first inquiring.
And you learn more about, I didn't know who some of these saints were. I mean, I know I had an icon of them, but now, you see one, you're like, I'm going to do a little bit more, research and reading on this saint. And then you connect with that saint. And I think that's what also solidified the faith for me, was like you mentioned with Father Josiah Trenum, seeing how he was, you're like, if this is an example of the church, it's what I want. And I think that's the same thing we find with the saints and with the, teachings of the elders. It's like, if this is, a staple in the Orthodox faith, it's like, well, that's exactly where I want to be.
Exactly.
Well, I'm wondering if there's anything else we can touch on. I think we did pretty well. Is there anything that you want to tell anybody? Or I know, are you fasting as well right now?
Most of the time.
Fast?
I mean, I'm not going to lie and say that I've been keeping it perfectly.
Oh, same.
I've had dairy a few times. I went on a date with my wife last week, and
that's my biggest.
The restaurant had
one.
some baked mac and cheese, and I was hungry, and I went for it. But I'm mostly avoiding meat. I did eat meat once at the beginning because I was hungry at work. I didn't know what the cafeteria had yet. There was some like chicken Caesar salad thing, one of those like $3 refrigerated ones. I had that, but I am attempting to keep the fast.
I think that's another thing people need to realize is, fast how you can, not how you can't, and not to beat yourself up over it,
Yeah, I mean, it's not a sin to break a fast. It's just depriving yourself of a helpful spiritual tool. So it might not be smart to break it, but it's not like God's going to punish you for not keeping it perfectly. I mean,
and I think it's
like you said, pray as you can, Yeah.
And I think it's also usually,
and it's certainly a bitter fast,
the results of what happens when you break a fast. If you let the results of that affect other parts of your life, whether it be lustful thinking or pride, it's like breaking a fast, like you said. I mean, it's not ideal. And I've done the same thing this one. Luckily, this isn't Lent. So, Lent, this is my first big fast as an Orthodox Christian. So Lent, I plan on really, but I mean, I'm like 130 pounds. So you're
130? How tall are you?
Something like that, 6'2" or something like that.
Bro, you got to eat a sandwich.
That's what I'm saying. So me not eating meat for 40 days, and I don't eat seafood.
I don't like seafood most of the time.
But that's why we're supposed to. My spiritual father said, well, maybe that's why you need to eat it. You don't like it? Do it while you're fasting.
Yep.
Humble yourself.
That's very Orthodox. Yeah. Do things you don't like. I know my wife's getting very sick of peanut butter on this fast, and I understand. For some reason, this one's been tough for me food-wise. Like usually for Lent, it's no problem.
Well, you're also moving. You're not at a house where you can sit there and cook every night. It's like you're probably running all over the place. You're out and about. You're like, oh, and living in this world doesn't help when you drive by a Wendy's or a Jimmy John's or Raising Cane's.
I mean, my wife was feeling sick the other night. It was like 1:30 in the morning. I went out to the gas station to get her some medicine, And the guy, first thing the guy says when I walk in, the clerk, he's like, "Hey man, you want a cheeseburger?" I was like, "Get behind me, Satan." No. So I just said to him, that's not going to help my sick wife, but thank you for the offer. But of course I want a cheeseburger. Who doesn't want a cheeseburger? Yeah. And then of course, after the fast, that's when every Orthodox Christian gets sick because I eat so much meat and cheese out of joy. But yeah, I'm doing what I can.
Yeah, same here.
Someday I'll be better at it, maybe.
Well, today we also celebrate the conception of the Theotokos.
That's right.
So today is a feast day on a fast day, and I always find those very mentally confusing for me.
Yeah. By feast, they mean slightly fewer restrictions.
Yes, exactly.
Maybe not what I think of when I hear the word feast.
One more peanut butter and jelly sandwich today.
Yeah, so. I've had a lot of PB&Js this fast. I don't know why it's getting to me, this one.
Well, it will. Well, hey, I want to thank you
Yeah.
for coming on and sharing your journey, and it was very edifying. And I encourage people to go get the book. And like you said, they can get it directly from you. I'll put all the links down in the description. And I
Oh,
need to
thank you.
get
Yeah,
it.
I can
I
email
need
those to you.
Perfect. Yeah, I need to get a copy myself. So I'll be sending you a message, and hopefully we can do this again in the future when the channel picks up. And I really appreciate it, man. Is there anything you wanna leave us with?
No, I appreciate the invitation. Thank you for having me on. I'm a big fan of your Instagram channel. I share a lot of
Thank
your
you.
posts.
Glory to God.
I mean, I had never seen you before. Like I wouldn't have connected your name to the Orthodox Logos, but I like the format of your posts. It's
Thank you.
catches your attention. It's well formatted. I like those. So I hope and pray you'll keep doing what you're doing, and we can take up more internet space with Orthodox imagery, and the more we
I
can
hope
take
so.
over, the less room our enemies have to take
Yeah.
over.
Lord willing. Well, thank you
Yeah.
again, and we'll talk soon. I appreciate you.
All right. Thank you so
God
much. God
bless.
bless.